Good morning, yogis and friends. And today I'm here to share with you some of those sequencing techniques, class sequencing techniques that I shared in a previous post. And I got some questions about, hey, could you explain some of these? Because I don't know what you're talking about. And so I sort of did a little bit more brainstorming and work around it. This might even become an online course, I don't know. Around some of these sequencing techniques. Now this is just an overview, so this is by no means going to give you everything that you need to know with different techniques and different methods for sequencing, but might give you some ideas for those of you who are struggling to create your own classes or classes for the classes that you teach. My name is Ashley, by the way, if we haven't met. Hello, welcome to this group. This is Yoga Sequencing and Teaching Tips, where I share behind the scenes of my yoga teacher training, as well as just tips and tricks with actually creating your class plan. And to me, this is the most fun part of class creation or of teaching yoga, one of the most fun parts, besides getting to know the students. But not everybody thinks that. And to me, it's like kind of working a math equation where you have to plug and place things, and it is a skill. So you need to practice that skill. Memorization is a big thing with yoga teaching. So memorization is a skill that develops over time to not forget poses on one side compared to the other. It is a skill, it takes practice, same with mirroring and all the other kinds of things. So let me go through some of these sequencing methods for you. And I broke it down into two parts, focus and flow. Here's what I mean by that. There's four different ways to pick a focus for your class, and then five different ways actually, or more, you might come up with a few more, that you choose to flow. And you don't need to have a focus for your class. You can definitely just flow and see how that goes. But you do need some sort of flow for your class. So that's required. The focus is sort of up to you. Maybe today you're doing a basic general class, so you don't really want to pick a focus. So let's go through those two things. So you want a focus and a flow. Let's just say for the sake of this, you want to pick a focus, and you need to pick the style that you flow. So your focus is your what, and your flow is your how. Your focus, there are four different ways. I've got them on the sheet of paper. I will put these in a pretty PDF that I will actually probably give out to you for free soon, but I wrote them down because this is how I brainstorm. So how to pick a focus, or what would you pick for a focus? Number one, you could pick a peak pose, pick a peck of pickled peppers. You could pick a peak pose. You could pick a destination pose or a goal pose. So an actual pose that you're going to center your class around. And that is sort of the sequencing method that I went through in my 10-step sequencing guide and all of my videos that I talk about sequencing. I talk about peak pose, but that's not the only way. You can do a peak pose. You could choose a muscle or a body part to work. So instead of just a singular pose, you're doing yoga for like tight hips or lower back. So a body part, or maybe it's shoulders. So you're not necessarily going into a big pose. So that's the second way you could pick a focus. The third way is maybe emotionally focused. So you're doing yoga for anxiety or excitement or overwhelm. So you're picking or designing your class around an emotional, either something you want to add to your life or release from your life. So an emotional theme focus. And the fourth one, that you could pick for a focus of your class, is a theme, like a yoga theme, like yamas or niyamas, or maybe you're focused on a specific breath style, or maybe you're focused on something that is a little bit different, just something, maybe you had an inspiration, it's a quote, so just a theme. I really like the book Theme Weaver by Michelle Marshall-Dawn. If you don't have that one, that's one I highly recommend for people who are already yoga teachers. It is a requirement for my yoga teacher training to have that book, but we don't get to it until like the later half. So pick a focus for your class. Number one, you could pick a peak pose. You could pick a certain muscle or body part. You could pick an emotional focus or a theme, a yoga theme or quote to wrap your class around. So that you don't absolutely need a focus, but I would recommend it because then it shows that you put some effort into planning your class. So focus. Again, I'll have more on this soon enough where you can download this information. I don't have a blog, so I don't post a blog, so it's something I will give you as, I like making PDFs, okay? I like making manuals. All right, so focus. Understandable, right? Hopefully that's understandable. Pick a focus for your class. And yes, you can combine a couple. You can combine emotional with a peak pose, but anyway, we're just overview, remember. And then flow. This is where it kind of gets interesting and kind of fun. So there's different ways to flow, and I have 5 listed out here. Number 1, blocks, a block type of flow. Number 2, a ladder flow. Number 3, a wave flow. Number 4, I just added this, I'm going to call it robot flow. And then number 5, a set sequence of poses. So this is actually, I think, more fun to go through than picking a focus, is to pick the type of flow that you're going to do. This is especially prominent in vinyasa flow when you're actually flowing through the poses. The robot flow is probably closest to a hatha or a what's it called? Restorative or yin class, where you're really just doing like right, left, like really robotic, but hopefully moving gracefully, but you're just going one pose and then the next, and there's really no kind of flow. So that's robotic. But let's go through each of them. Blocks. Number 1, block flow. That's what I called it. These are not technical terms. This is just my way of putting it out there. A block flow is often what I do, and also what I have taught in my videos and my sequencing templates and everything. You've got a chunk of poses, that's a warm-up, you've got a block or a chunk, and then you've got the sun salutations, and then you've got sequence number 1, you do right and left. So you can kind of almost like having note cards. Like you have your note card for a warm-up, you have your note card for sequence number 2, a note card for sequence number 3, a note card for your seated poses. So you can kind of like put them in an order using note cards if you wanted to, or pieces of paper. So this is sort of a block formation. I was just going to say something with this. It's super common. This is also what you'll see in a lot of pre-formatted fitness classes, like Body Pump or Body Flow, or what are those other ones? Anything that comes kind of canned in a class, because it's, you know, a choreography set to music. So you've got song number 1 with what goes with song number 1, song number 2 with what goes with song number 2. So I did a body flow training, and it was very much that way. There was 10 different songs, started with a centering and grounding, and then there was a Tai Chi warm-up, and then there was a heat building, and then there was some other ones, back bending. So it kind of went in sections. You could definitely do this with music. So song number 1, song number 2, and that's how you would sequence your class, is just picking and choosing. Of course, it has this little bell-shaped curve, so you start with centering and grounding, you move your way up into warm-up, and then into a like middle body of class, and then down to seated, supine, and shavasana. So blocks. It's what I often do. It makes it easy for me because I can do an internally rotated hip lunge sequence, and then do the externally rotated hip lunge sequence, do some seated poses, maybe there's a block for the peak pose. It makes it easy. I think it does anyway. So that's what I'm used to. Let's go through the other ones. Ladder. Have you done a ladder flow before? There's a couple ways we could do ladder flows. I had one teacher when I was first starting my yoga practice do a ladder flow. It was a 45-minute class in the gym, and she always did this, and I thought it was just a very interesting and unique way to sequence. I don't see it a whole lot, but it does make things really easy, actually. So here's one way you could do it. You always want to have a warm-up and a cool-down, and they can pretty much be the same. It's nice to have sort of bookends that people are used to. So you have your warm-up and your cool-down. You might do some cat and cow from child's pose, and then down dog, and maybe a sun salutation, or not, and then get right into your ladder. The way that the teacher I went to did this was she had 5 poses. And I've done this in a way too, where I've just asked people, what pose do you want to do today? Or what's your favorite pose? Or your least favorite pose? You just pick 5 poses. Hopefully they go from a little easier to the last one would be a little bit more intense, or one that you wouldn't want to hold. But you start with pose number 1, and you do pose number 1 for 5 breaths or so you get used to it. And then you do the other side, if it's a lunge or a second side thing. So you do right and left, and you hold for a while, and then maybe a vinyasa in between. Then you do pose 1 and 2, but the second one you would hold longer, 5 breaths or so, do the other side, and then you go through a vinyasa. And then you go through pose 1 and 2 real quick, and then transition to pose 3 and hold for a while. So just sort of keeps building on each other. Then pose 4, you do that for a while, and then you go all the way through up to pose 5. That should maybe be your hardest pose, or one that you wouldn't want to hold as long. And I picked the number 5 because it's easy to remember, but you might have 6 poses. It depends how long the class is. So then you get to the 5th one, you hold that for a while, and then you might go through all of them as a flow several times. If you wanted to go in reverse, ladder up and a ladder down, that's up to you too. So that's the concept of a ladder. You can also do this with breath. So not just the poses, but let's say you have a 5-pose sequence. You hold every single one for 1 breath, so you flow through it quick, and then you hold every single pose for 2 breaths, and then you hold every pose for 3 breaths, or you could go the reverse. You hold every pose for 5 breaths first, and then 4, 3, 2, 1, or pick your number, 1, 2, 3, up to 10. I do this with sun salutations too, where the first one, inhale, reach up, exhale, forward fold. We hold plank pose, chaturanga, up dog, and down dog for 1 breath each, and then 2 breaths, and then 3, up to 5. When we get to the 5th one and we're holding chaturanga for 5 breaths, it's kind of killer. But that's what I call my ladder sun salutation A. It's more of a breath hold. So you can either add on poses or you can add length to your breaths. So that's ladder flow. A wave flow. If you have questions, please comment, I'll answer them. A wave flow is kind of similar to a ladder, but it's, see this little squiggle line? Smaller wave to a bigger wave to a bigger wave to a bigger wave, and then down. So a wave flow, if you have you can, again, warm up and cool down can be very similar, and then you start with a sequence of, 3 to 5 poses or so. 3 to 5 poses or so, and they're pretty simple. The second wave through, so maybe you do right and left. The second wave through, you would add a little intensity to the poses. So same or similar poses, add a little intensity or add something else. So it doesn't have to be adding on a pose, but maybe if you did a kneeling side plank, you would do a leg lifted side plank. And then the next wave around, you might be a leg lifted side plank. So depending on what your focus is or what your sequence, your base sequence is, so you'd have your base sequence, you would just add on. And then you could also tell in your classes if you're able to make it to that 4th wave or 5th wave or however long. I do have a teacher that teaches like this, and his name is Lang. He does those waves, and each wave gets a little more intense, and I know this, and I remember going to his class and we were at the 3rd wave, and I was like, oh, I really am feeling like coming down now. But he had a 4th wave, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. Not really, I really just had to suck it up, but yeah, so waves are just a base sequence, adding intensity, perhaps having a vinyasa flow in between or a little bit of a break in between, which is why you see that little down thing, little bit of downtime. So it might be a down dog, hold for a while, and then we get to the wave again. At any point in any of these, you can add like a little bit of core strength here and there, a little bit of extra. If you have more time at the end, add more stretching, add more time to just relax. Shavasana is always nice if you hold for 10 to 15 minutes. All right, so that's a wave. I hope that was understandable too. And then we've got robot. I kind of just mentioned it briefly before. Robotic style of sequencing is when you just do a pose, and you do right and left pose, next pose, right and left, or left and right, and you just go back and forth, and it's just robotic. It's not my favorite way, but that's what I would call like a restorative class. You go right from one pose to the next. There's no flow really in between. The transitions are sort of not choppy, but the transitions aren't as important as getting into the pose and then staying there for a while. So usually that's great if you're holding the poses a little longer, or you're really focusing on alignment in the pose, not so much the transition. Personally, I think transitions are so important and should be emphasized and focused on a little bit more, and we should slow them all down. So no yanking your leg up or stepping super far forward, or we don't want momentum in those transitions. Okay, the 5th one I have is a set sequence, and this could be something like the Ashtanga primary series, and you want to choose a focus for your primary series. So you might choose an emotional focus because you've already got the sequence, so maybe you're just talking on emotional sequence or something more with the yoga concepts. You kind of have to choose. If you do pick a theme, stick with it throughout the whole class. Don't be flip-flopping from one to the other. And also another thing, if you pick a theme, mention it more often than just at the beginning and the end. You need that in between. The class is important too. So although the beginning and the end are the easiest places to mention a theme, definitely put in little golden nuggets or little reminders of that theme, and how you can do more on or off your mat. Anyway, set sequence, it could be like the Ashtanga variation or Bikram series or whatever your series is, or it could be you looking up a series or a sequence online and using that one. This one is less, you're less able to, play off your, that's a different topic. We'll get there in a moment. With a set sequence, you're less able to, if you're not used to changing things up depending on who's in your class, it can be a little challenging. So make sure you can offer those modifications and those variations for those of you who are have an all levels, a whole bunch of people, and you don't know who's going to be there. So set sequence. With a set sequence, if you do teach that week to week, it's kind of nice to be able to break it down and make it basic at first, especially if you're doing a series of classes. Of course, if you've got new people in class, it's going to be different week to week. That's a different topic too. So just to recap real quick, I have focus and flow. Find your focus for your class first. If that's something you want to do, you can choose peak pose, muscle or body part, an emotional focus, or a theme based on yogic concepts. And then choosing your style of flow, a block style of flow, a ladder style of flow, a wave style of flow, a robot style, or a set sequence. So that is sort of what I was coming up with to talk about different ways to sequence a yoga class. If you have any more, let me know. If you have questions, let me know as well. I'm happy to make more videos or more resources. I will be putting this in written form and likely in a downloadable PDF, so I will have that available at some point. Just stay tuned. And Robin asked how you weave a theme through the class. That is definitely a different topic that's going to be its own video or its own thing. I do recommend the book Theme Weaver by Michelle Marshall-Dawn. If you have not checked it out, go look at it. She does a wonderful job of explaining how to weave a theme through classes with different ways. But there are multiple ways, and there is the way that I use, and I have to kind of brainstorm a little bit of the way that I do it. This is actually one of my struggle points actually is the theming of classes, but just like sequencing, that used to be a huge struggle of mine. As I continue to work on it, it started to become my favorite thing to do. So in time, if you struggle with something, I think as you work on it and as you get over the struggle of how to do this certain thing, it's going to be something that you love in the future. So we'll talk about themes in another video, and thank you so much for watching. Now go out there and sequence some great classes and let me know what method that you prefer. All right, talk to you later.